The Enchantress is particularly important in the story of Beauty and the Beast. However, in Disney's 1991 animation, she only appears via the stained glass windows during the opening prologue. Disney's 2017 reimagining of the fairy tale expands her role, casting actress Hattie Morahan and giving her character real time on screen throughout the movie, which means that now we can fill in some gaps that fans have speculated about from the animated film. Yippee-ki-yay movie lovers, it's Jan here, and in this video I want to delve into the character of the Enchantress and explore some theories about her role in the live-action remake of Beauty and the Beast. Just a quick warning, there are spoilers ahead for the new Beauty and the Beast movie if you haven't seen it yet. If that's you, tap or click here for my spoiler-free review and come back and watch this video after you've seen the movie. So the first thing that's significantly different in Disney's remake is that the introductory prologue is actually voiced by the Enchantress herself. Her new narration helps to fill in some additional backstory about the cold-hearted and selfish nature of the prince, and how he taxed his people heavily to pay for his lavish parties and possessions, which by the way feels like a bit of historical commentary given that the new movie is set in the mid-18th century, a few decades before the French Revolution. The filmmaker's decision to have the Enchantress deliver the narration is an interesting one, because although we don't initially know it, her character is going to be at the centre of many key moments during the new film. And it also points to her role as a sort of guiding hand over the events of the story. Next we get to actually see the transformation of the old woman who appears at the prince's door into the Enchantress, in a scene very reminiscent of the flashback scene from The Enchanted Christmas, an animated Beauty and the Beast spin-off movie released in 1997. As well as showing the prince's transformation into the beast, the way that the Enchantress is bathed in glowing light and appears to hover in front of the prince is similar in both movies. As for the way she transformed from an old woman in need of help into a magical being, that reminded me of the fairy godmother's transformation in Disney's 2015 live-action remake of Cinderella. Indeed, the idea of the Enchantress as a sort of fairy or fairy godmother actually connects back to the original 18th century French story of Beauty and the Beast by Gabrielle Suzanne Barbeau de Villeneuve. In fact, in Villeneuve's original story from 1740, there's a good fairy who helps both Beauty and the Beast, and this fairy actually turns out to be Beauty's aunt, as unknown to Beauty, her mother was also a fairy. Villeneuve's tale also features an old fairy who looked after the prince while his mother the queen was defending the kingdom, but later in the story this wicked old fairy cursed the prince, turning him into a beast, simply because he refused to marry her. Disney's animated and live-action films combine these different good and bad fairies into one person, the Enchantress, who encompasses various aspects of their characters. And interestingly enough, in the Disney novel As Old as Time, A Twisted Tale, the Enchantress is actually Belle's mother. But I wonder whether in this live-action version of Beauty and the Beast it's the prince's dead mother who has sent the Enchantress to help redeem her son and set him back on the right path from which he strayed. Remember, in the family portrait, the prince's mother is the only person whose picture hasn't been ripped by the beast, perhaps because she was the good influence in the family, and later, as Mrs. Potts tells us in the story, it was the prince's father who turned his son bad, which is what ultimately led to the curse. If that's all true, then in this film the Enchantress is basically acting in loco parentis, in other words, in the place of a parent, and by teaching the prince a lesson is therefore fulfilling the role his mother can no longer play. Now, I'm sure many of you made the connection that the beggar woman Agatha is the same person as the Enchantress, who seems to have disguised herself in this way so she can move freely without the townspeople paying her much attention, which means she can keep an eye on events and even influence them somewhat. Agatha first appears when Gaston points her out to Belle as a warning about the consequences of what happens to unmarried women after their fathers die. And the next time we see Agatha is when she comes to help Maurice after Gaston and Lefou abandon him to the wolves. This is a moment that shows the compassionate and kind side of the Enchantress, and after she takes Maurice back to her makeshift home in the woods, she gives him hot tea, or perhaps some magic concoction, and helps him get better. By the way, did you notice the owl in these scenes? It's interesting because in medieval Europe, owls were often associated with wise women and witches. And in some symbolism, they're connected to magical forces and the idea of being able to see beyond your immediate reality, which is a nice metaphor for the story of Beauty and the Beast. Now, given the owl's symbolism, the fact that Agatha has one is a nice way to hint that she's connected with the character of the Enchantress, and therefore has a lot more power than the townspeople would assume a beggar woman would have. With all that in mind, it's also intriguing that in the original animated movie, an owl appeared to Maurice and Philippe just before Maurice took the wrong turning on his way to the fair. And in the new movie, given the way she watches over events, it's implied that the Enchantress caused the lightning strike to fell the tree that blocked Maurice's path and led him into the enchanted part of the forest. By the way, when I interviewed Beauty and the Beast director Bill Condon recently, he told me that the cane that the Enchantress uses at the start of the film is the same shape as the branch that came down in front of Maurice. You could also argue that the Enchantress guided subsequent events that led Maurice to the Beast's castle, even perhaps the wolves chasing him there. And by steering Maurice towards the castle, she seems to have been hoping to give the cursed prince an opportunity to interact with someone from the outside world and redeem himself, which is what eventually happens when he meets Belle. Agatha was also present during the mob scene, observing the events, and she quietly entered the castle during the final battle between the mob and the enchanted objects. And it's there where she witnesses the true love Belle and Beast have for each other. What's really interesting in this scene is that Belle isn't actually the one who breaks the curse. The last petal falls before Belle declares her love for Beast, and so the enchanted characters are condemned to stay inanimate objects, and Beast himself already appears to have died from the wounds inflicted by Gaston. But when the Enchantress sees how much Belle loves Beast, she takes control and reverses the curse, bringing the rose petals back to life. She envelops the Beast in the petals and a magical energy that revives him and transforms him back into his human form. Then the enchanted characters also come back to life, the crumbling castle is restored, and winter melts away to spring, with the sun rising over the previously dark castle and grounds. Given the Enchantress's guiding hand in these events, I wonder whether she also caused the castle rampart to crumble below Gaston's feet, sending him plummeting to his death. After all, at the start of the film, Gaston did use the example of Agatha and the fact she's a spinster reduced to begging as a way to try to control Belle and curb her independence. And he also tried to kill Maurice, then lied about it and undermined Agatha as a witness, calling her a filthy hag in front of the rest of the town. The decision by the filmmakers to give more screen time to the character of the Enchantress, aka Agatha, in the new version, is an interesting one, and I'm sure fans will debate her motives and to what extent she could be considered a good character or a cruel one, much as fans have done with her character in the animated movie. However, I do think that the filmmakers have given the character more agency in the live-action version, beefing up her role as a kind of subversive woman who lives on the edge of society and its expectations. Just like the updating of Belle's character, the updating of the Enchantress's character is in a way in tune with Villeneuve's original French story, which tackled themes and issues important to 18th century women. And it's also in tune with how screenwriter Linda Wolverton wanted her version of the tale in the animated movie to be more relevant to contemporary audiences by making Belle more independent back in 1991. And I also think that the filmmakers have made an effort to humanise the Enchantress, changing her from a character you only see talked about via a stained glass window to someone who can show compassion at various moments in the story. And you could even argue that her decision to curse the prince and those around him was for the good of his kingdom, as before this he had little love in his heart and treated his subjects poorly, taxing them excessively. As for the idea of punishing his servants as well, that's fixed to an extent in the new version, as it's made clear that they were not blameless as they didn't try to stop the prince. Though I'd imagine if they had stood up to him, they would simply have been dismissed. However, Mrs. Potts does tell Belle that the servants bear some responsibility for how the prince turned out like his cruel father, who she says twisted him up to be just like him, and they did nothing to prevent it. Now, I'd love to know what you thought about the Enchantress and the changes to the character in the new version of Beauty and the Beast, and how did you like the ending to the new movie? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, do hit that thumbs up button and subscribe for more of my Disney and Beauty and the Beast videos, plus a chance to win this awesome Disney hardback book on my Beauty and the Beast Easter eggs video. You can tap or click here to check that out, as well as other videos you might enjoy. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Yippee-ki-yay, movie lovers!